A wealthy businessman kicks a poor little girl out of restaurant. When he discovers her true identity, the shocking truth leaves him filled with regret. The sun beat down on the bustling streets of Florida. Amid the chaos of vendors shouting and the aroma of tacos filling the air, James Kelly, the epitome of success, was seated in an elegant restaurant overlooking the main square. At 45, James was a man used to power. His sharp suit, gold watch, and confident demeanor commanded attention wherever he went. He took a slow sip of his aged whiskey, his thoughts already consumed by the next big business deal that would add another fortune to his name. "Mr. Kelly, your lunch will be ready shortly," the waiter said with a polite bow. James barely nodded, already lost in his thoughts, plotting his next multi-million-dollar acquisition. At that same moment, just outside the restaurant, an 8-year-old girl named Emily walked the streets barefoot, carrying a small box of gum in her hands. Her tattered dress fluttered in the breeze as she searched the crowd for potential customers, every step driven by the need to earn money for her sick mother. Today felt no different from any other day, but fate had something else in store for her. James, from his seat inside, glanced absent-mindedly out the window, and his eyes landed on Emily as she skillfully maneuvered through the crowd. In a matter of seconds, she was inside the restaurant, having slipped past the guards unnoticed. Her large, curious eyes met James's, and for a moment, everything seemed to pause. She stepped forward without hesitation. "Would you like to buy some gum, sir?" she asked, her voice soft but determined. James frowned, annoyed by the interruption. "Can't you see I'm busy? Go away before I call security." But Emily didn't move. Her eyes held a strange intensity that caused James to pause. "Please, sir, my mum is very sick, and we need money for her medicine, but that's not the only reason I'm here." James's irritation gave way to curiosity. "Oh? And what other reason could there be?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. Emily took a deep breath, as though steeling herself. "I have something important to tell you. Something that could save your life." The words hung in the air, heavier than the girl likely understood. James, despite his initial annoyance, felt a flicker of intrigue. He was a man who had heard many lies and false promises in his life, but there was something different about this child. "Save my life," James repeated, half amused. "How exactly is a little girl like you going to do that?" Emily looked around, aware of the stares from the other diners. "I can't say it here," she whispered, leaning in closer. "It's a secret, but if you listen, you'll understand." Against his better judgment, James gestured for her to sit. "You've got 5 minutes," he said. "If this is some trick—" "It's not." Emily cut him off, her voice shaking just slightly. She sat down carefully, as if the offer might be taken away at any second. James crossed his arms. "All right. Speak." Emily's story began haltingly, but soon it flowed like a rushing river. She spoke of strange dreams and visions, images and names that James hadn't heard in years. She described personal moments, buried secrets that no one else could possibly know. As she talked, James's expression shifted from skepticism to shock. How could she possibly know all these things? His breath caught when Emily mentioned a name from his past, one he hadn't thought about in decades. "And that's why, Mr. Kelly," Emily concluded, her eyes locked on his, "you have to be careful. Something terrible will happen if you don't change your ways." For the first time in years, James was rendered speechless. The world around them, the restaurant, the noise, the people, seemed to disappear. It was just him and this mysterious girl. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily smiled, a smile full of wisdom, far beyond her years. "I'm just a girl selling gum. but sometimes the answers come from the places you least expect. The moment was broken by the waiter returning with James's lunch. When he looked back, Emily was gone, leaving only her box of gum on the table and a swirl of unanswered questions in his mind. James stared at the food in front of him, his appetite forgotten, his thoughts spinning in 1,000 directions. How had this girl, a child from the streets, shaken the very foundation of his world? The days that followed were a blur for James Kelly. Emily's words echoed in his mind, disturbing his sleep, clouding his focus. In the middle of a board meeting, he found himself lost in thought, her voice replaying over and over. Eventually, he couldn't take it anymore. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Hello?" A woman's voice answered, tentative and familiar. "Isabel," James began, his voice trembling. "It's me, James." There was a long pause before she responded. "James? After all these years? Why now?" James closed his eyes, memo. "But if there's even the slightest chance that our daughter is alive, don't you think we should investigate?" Isabel stopped, her eyes meeting James's. In his gaze, she saw something she hadn't in years: vulnerability, regret, and a glimmer of hope. "And if it's true," James continued, "what if our daughter has been out there all this time, waiting for us to find her?" Isabel sat down slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "If it's true, how would we ever find her? And how could we explain why we never looked for her before?" James shook his head. "I don't know, but we have to try. I owe it to her. And to you." While the couple talked across the city, Emily returned to her modest home. Her mother, Evelyn, greeted her with a tired smile. "How did it go today, my child?" Evelyn asked, hugging her daughter tightly. Emily smiled back, but her eyes held a wisdom beyond her years. "Good, Mum. I think I did something important today," and Evelyn kissed her daughter's forehead. "I'm sure you did, my love. You always do important things." That night, while Emily slept, Evelyn sat beside her bed, watching her daughter's peaceful face. Gently, she touched the locket that Emily always wore, a gift from her grandmother. "Oh, Mom," Evelyn whispered into the air, "if only you knew the gifts your granddaughter has. If only you knew the secrets she holds." At that moment, as if answering a silent call, Emily opened her eyes. "Mum," she said sleepily, "I had another dream." Evelyn leaned in closer. "What did you dream about, my love?" "I dreamed of a couple," Emily replied. "They were sad, but also hopeful. And there was a baby, Mum. A baby who got lost, but now they want to find her." A shiver ran down Evelyn's spine. "It's just a dream, Emily. Go back to sleep." But as Emily closed her eyes, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. Something that would change their lives forever. Back at the cafe, James and Isabel had made up their minds. They would search for the truth, no matter how painful it might be. "Where do we start?" Isabel asked. James reached into his pocket and pulled out the pack of gum Emily had left at the restaurant. "We start with her, the girl who seems to know more than she should." As they left the cafe, neither noticed the man watching them from a parked car across the street. The man pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Sir," he said when the line connected, "we have a problem. Kelly is asking questions about the past, and he's not alone." On the other end of the line, a cold voice responded, "Take care of it. We can't let the truth come out. Not now." The man hung up and started his car, discreetly following James and Isabel. The search for the truth had begun. But with it, so had the dangers lurking in the shadows of the past. James and Isabel's search for the truth led them down a path filled with shadows and dangers they never imagined. Days turned into weeks as they followed every lead, every rumor, every loose thread from their shared past. One rainy afternoon, James was in his office, sifting through old documents, when his assistant rushed in. "Mr. Kelly, there's someone insisting on seeing you. He says it's urgent." James looked up, intrigued. "Who is it?" "An older man. He says he worked at the hospital where your daughter was born." James's heart skipped a beat. "Let him in immediately." Moments later, a man in his 70s, with grey hair and tired eyes, entered the office. He introduced himself as Dr. Ramirez, a former pediatrician at the hospital. "Mr. Kelly," the doctor began, his voice trembling slightly, "I've carried this secret for far too long. When I heard you were investigating your daughter, I knew it was time to speak." James leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What secret, doctor? What do you know?" Dr. Ramirez took a deep breath before continuing. "Your daughter didn't die that night, Mr. Kelly. She was stolen." The words hit like lightning in the room. James shot to his feet, knocking his chair to the ground. "What are you saying? How is that possible?" "There was a group," the doctor explained, his eyes filled with remorse. "They trafficked babies, threatened my family if I didn't cooperate. I helped them forge the death certificate." James felt the world spin around him. He had to brace himself on the desk to keep from collapsing. "Who took my daughter?" Dr. Ramirez shook his head. "I'm not certain, but there's a name I overheard. Scott Vega, an old business associate. Someone you once considered a friend. Someone who mysteriously disappeared years ago." Meanwhile, across town, Isabel had decided to visit the local orphanage, following a hunch. As she spoke with the director, an older woman named Sophia, a photo on the wall caught her eye. "That little girl," Isabel said, pointing to the picture of a child around 5 years old. "Who is she?" Sophia looked at the photo fondly. "Ah, that's Emily, a very special girl who stayed with us some years ago. She was adopted by a woman named Evelyn." Isabel's heart skipped a beat. "Emily, can you tell me more about her?" As Sophia spoke, Isabel felt the puzzle pieces begin to fit together. Emily's age, her mysterious arrival at the orphanage, the dreams and visions James had mentioned. Back in James's office, the businessman was about to call Isabel when he noticed something odd. A small red laser dot appeared on his chest, slowly moving towards his heart. "Get down!" he shouted, diving onto the doctor just as a bullet shattered the window, embedding itself in the wall where James had stood seconds before. Chaos erupted in the building. Security guards rushed toward the office as James and Dr. Ramirez crawled toward the door. "We have to get out of here," James gasped. "Someone doesn't want us to uncover the truth." As they fled down the emergency stairwell, James couldn't stop thinking about Emily. If his suspicions were correct, if she really was his daughter, she was now in danger too. At that very moment, Emily was walking home after selling gum. Suddenly, a chill ran down her spine. She stopped, looking around cautiously. She saw nothing unusual, but couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. "Emily!" Her mother's voice called from the doorway of their house. "Come inside, quickly, my girl." Emily ran to her mother, who hugged her tightly. "What's wrong, Mom?" she asked, noticing the worry in Evelyn's eyes. "Nothing, sweetheart," Evelyn replied, though her voice trembled slightly. I had a bad feeling." Inside the house, Evelyn pulled all the curtains closed and checked the door twice to make sure it was securely locked. Emily watched her with curiosity. "Mom," she finally said, "does this have to do with my dreams? With the man from the restaurant?" Evelyn knelt in front of her daughter, taking her small hands in hers. Emily, my love, there are things I haven't told you, things about your past, about your real family. Emily's eyes widened. My real family? But you're my family, Mom, and you always will be, Evelyn said, her eyes brimming with tears. But there are people out there, people who've been searching for you for a long time. Before Evelyn could continue, a loud knock on the door startled them both. "Open up!" a man's voice demanded from outside. "We know the girl is in there!" Evelyn pulled Emily into a tight embrace, her mind racing to find an escape. She had always known this day might come, but she had never truly been prepared for it. "Listen to me, Emily," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. "No matter what happens, remember that I love you, and everything I've done was to protect you." The door shook under the weight of the pounding. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, focusing as her grandmother had taught her. In her mind, she saw flashes of James and Isabel, of a hospital, of a baby being taken away in the dead of night. And then, with a clarity that terrified her, she saw the face of the man on the other side of the door. "Scott," Emily whispered, the name slipping from her lips before she even knew why. Evelyn's eyes widened in shock. "How do you know that name?" But before Emily could answer, the door burst open with a deafening crash. The truth, long buried, was about to come to light, and with it, the dangers that had lurked in the shadows for 2 decades. The sound of the door giving way echoed through the small house. Evelyn, driven by pure maternal instinct, pushed Emily behind her, standing fiercely to face the intruders. 3 men entered, led by one with a deep scar running across his left cheek. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over Evelyn and then settled on Emily. "Scott," Evelyn said, her voice unsteady but determined. She had always known this day would come. The scarred man, Scott, offered a humorless smile. "It's been a long time, Evelyn. I see you've taken good care of the girl." Peeking out from behind her mother, Emily stared at Scott. A flood of memories and sensations overwhelmed her. A dimly lit hospital, the cry of a baby, hurried whispers in the night. Without fully understanding why, the words left her mouth. "You stole me." Scott's expression flickered with surprise, but he quickly regained his composure. "Well, well, it seems the little one has some special talents," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "That only makes her more valuable." Evelyn clenched her fists. "You won't take her. Not after all this time." "Oh, Evelyn," Scott replied, his voice heavy with false sympathy, "you don't have a choice. The girl is the key to everything. And now that James is asking questions, we can't let the truth come out." Meanwhile, James and Isabel were racing through the streets of Florida, following the address Sophia had given them. James's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and hope driving him forward. "What if we're too late?" Isabel panted as they rounded a corner. "We won't be," James said through gritted teeth. "We can't be." Back at Evelyn's house, the tension was suffocating. Scott stepped forward, his men flanking him. "You're coming with us, Emily," he said, extending a hand toward her. "There's a lot you need to learn about who you really are." But Emily didn't move. Instead, she closed her eyes, concentrating deeply. The images in her mind grew sharper, more vivid. She saw James and Isabel at the hospital holding a baby. She saw Scott in the shadows, making sinister deals. And she saw something else, something that filled her with a fierce resolve. When she opened her eyes, Emily locked her gaze on Scott. "I know who I am. I know what you did. And I know my real parents are coming for me." Scott's face was drained of color. "How?" "It doesn't matter," Emily said firmly. "We're leaving. Now. Scott barked, motioning to his men, who advanced toward Emily and Evelyn. But at that very moment the distant wail of sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. "Damn it!" Scott growled. "Someone must have called the police." Evelyn seized the moment of distraction, grabbing Emily's hand and sprinting toward the back of the house. Scott and his men pursued them, but the brief head start was just enough for them to slip through the back door and dive into the maze of alleys in the neighborhood. "Find them!" Scott roared at his men. "They can't escape." Evelyn and Emily ran hand in hand, zigzagging through narrow alleyways and backyard passages. The shouts and footsteps of their pursuers echoed closer and closer. "Mom!" Emily gasped as they ran. "I'm scared." Evelyn squeezed her daughter's hand tighter. "I know, sweetheart, but you're stronger than you think. Remember what your grandmother taught you." Emily nodded, briefly closing her eyes as they continued to run. In her mind, she envisioned a path, a way out. "This way," she suddenly said, pulling Evelyn toward a left-hand alley. Meanwhile, James's heart sank. "We're too late," Isabel murmured, her voice thick with emotion, tears brimming in her eyes. But James wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. They must be close. It was then that they heard the shouts and the sound of a chase not far away. Without hesitation, they ran toward the commotion, adrenaline fueling their every step. Evelyn and Emily emerged from a narrow alley into a small, bustling plaza. The crowd offered them a brief moment of camouflage, but they knew it wouldn't last. "Where do we go, Emily?" Evelyn asked, her eyes darting frantically around. Emily closed her eyes again, searching for that mysterious inner guide. "There," she finally said, pointing to the far side of the plaza. "I see them. I see my parents." Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat. She knew this moment would come, but nothing could have prepared her for the flood of emotions that washed over her. They began crossing the plaza, moving as quickly as they could without drawing attention, but just as they reached the halfway point, Scott's voice boomed over the noise of the crowd. "There they are! Grab them!" Chaos erupted in the square. People screamed and scattered in all directions, creating a frenzy that made both escape and pursuit equally difficult. In the midst of the confusion, James and Isabel reached the edge of the plaza. And then, as if fate had finally decided to show them mercy, their eyes locked with Emily's. For a moment, time seemed to stop. James saw in Emily's eyes the reflection of Isabel, the same fierce determination, the same spark of life. Isabel, for her part, felt her heart skip a beat as she recognized in Emily features she had seen countless times in photographs of her own childhood. "Emily!" they shouted in unison, running toward her. Evelyn, watching the scene unfold, knew the time had come. With tears in her eyes, she gave Emily one last embrace. "Go with them, my dear," she whispered. "You'll be safe." Emily looked at her, confused and frightened. "But, Mom—" Evelyn smiled sadly. "I'll always be your mother, but they're your family too. They love you, and they've been searching for you for so long." With a final kiss on Emily's forehead, Evelyn gently pushed her toward James and Isabel. Then, turning to face Scott and his men, who were quickly approaching, Evelyn stood in their path, giving Emily the chance to reunite with her biological parents. James reached Emily first, lifting her into his arms with a mix of disbelief and absolute joy. Isabel arrived a second later, wrapping both of them in a warm embrace. "Oh, my sweet girl," Isabel sobbed, stroking Emily's face. "We finally found you." But their reunion was cut short by Evelyn's scream. Scott had reached her, gripping her tightly. "This isn't over," Scott growled, his face twisted with rage. "The girl is the key to everything." Still holding Emily, James stepped forward. "It's over, Scott. The truth will come out, and you'll pay for what you've done." Just then, the sound of police sirens filled the air. Scott, realizing he was trapped, released Evelyn and tried to flee, but he was quickly surrounded by the officers arriving on the scene. As Scott was handcuffed and led away, James, Isabel, and Emily rushed over to Evelyn, who was being attended to by paramedics. "Thank you," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for taking care of our daughter all these years." Evelyn nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I only wanted to protect her. I didn't know the whole truth until she was older, and her abilities began to show." Emily, still in James's arms, reached out a hand to Evelyn. "I love you, Mum," she said softly. Isabel, understanding the deep bond between Emily and Evelyn, made a decision in that moment. "Evelyn," she said gently, "we would like you to remain a part of Emily's life. If you agree, of course." Evelyn looked at her, surprised. Then, unable to speak through her tears, she nodded. As the plaza filled with police and onlookers, the newly reunited family stood together, knowing that while the road ahead would be complicated, they would face it together. The truth had finally come to light, bringing with it the promise of a new beginning for everyone involved. James and Isabel, overwhelmed with joy at having finally found their daughter, now faced the challenge of building a relationship with a child they barely knew. Emily, for her part, was torn between the excitement of discovering her biological parents and the deep love she felt for Evelyn, the woman who had raised her all these years. The transition would be difficult for everyone. A week after the incident, the family gathered in the spacious living room of James's mansion. Evelyn, visibly uncomfortable in the luxurious surroundings, sat on the edge of a sofa while Emily curled up beside her. James, standing by the window, was the first to break the silence. "I think it's time we talk about how we're going to handle this situation," he said, his voice soft but firm. Isabel nodded, sitting across from Evelyn and Emily. "What matters most now is Emily's well-being," she added, looking tenderly at the girl. Evelyn squeezed Emily's hand. "I agree. Emily deserves to have her parents in her life, but she also needs stability." Emily looked around at the adults, her big eyes full of worry. "Do I have to choose?" she asked quietly. Everyone's heart sank at the question. James came over and knelt in front of her. "No, sweetheart," he said gently. "You don't have to choose. We're all your family now." Isabel joined them, sitting on the other side of Emily. "Your dad is right. Evelyn has been your mother all these years, and she always will be. We just want to be part of your life too, if you'll let us." Evelyn, her eyes brimming with tears, nodded. "Emily, my love, having more people who care about you is never a bad thing. Your parents and I will work together to give you the best." Emily looked at each of the adults, a small smile forming on her lips. "So, I can have 2 mums and a dad?" Her innocent question brought soft laughter and nods from everyone. "Of course I will," James responded, kissing his daughter's forehead. With that basic understanding in place, they began discussing the practical details. They decided that Emily would primarily live with James and Isabel, but spend weekends and part of her vacations with Evelyn. Moreover, Evelyn would always be welcome at James's house. As the adults spoke, Emily closed her eyes for a moment, letting the images flow through her mind, just as her grandmother had taught her. She saw a bright future, one filled with love and laughter. She saw her family not as divided, but as expanded and strengthened. Opening her eyes, Emily smiled. "Everything is going to be fine," she said with a certainty that startled the adults. Isabel looked at her curiously. "How do you know, sweetheart?" Emily shrugged. I just know, like I knew you were looking for me. James and Isabel exchanged glances. They still had much to learn about their daughter's special gifts. In the months that followed, life began to find a new rhythm. Emily moved into the mansion, but Evelyn was a constant presence. Her room was filled with new toys, yet the old teddy bear that Evelyn had given her years ago always held a place of honor on her bed. Determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past, James cut back his work hours to spend more time with his family. Isabel, for her part, focused on getting to know every detail of Emily's life, from her favorite meals to the stories she loved hearing before bed. One afternoon, while Emily played in the garden under Evelyn's watchful eye, James approached the woman who had raised his daughter. I can never thank you enough, he said, sitting beside her. Evelyn smiled gently. You don't need to. Every moment with Emily has been a gift. James nodded, watching his daughter laugh as she chased a butterfly. You know, when we lost her, when we thought we had lost her, I believed I would never be happy again. I buried myself in work, pushed Isabel away, thinking that money and success could fill the emptiness. And now? Evelyn asked. Now I know none of that matters, James replied. The real wealth is right there, he said, gesturing towards Emily. Just then, Emily came running toward them, her cheeks flushed from play. Dad, Mama Evelyn, did you see the butterfly? It was beautiful. James scooped her up, spinning her in the air as she laughed. Not as beautiful as you, my little one. From the house's doorway, Isabel watched the scene with her heart full of love. She never could have imagined her family turning out this way, but she wouldn't change it for anything in the world. That night, as Emily got ready for bed, she asked both Isabel and Evelyn to tell her a story. The two women, who might once have been rivals, now worked together to weave a magical tale for the child they both loved. James, listening from the hallway, felt a peace he hadn't known in decades. He understood the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There were still questions about Emily's special gifts, and the wounds of the past would take time to fully heal. But as he heard the blended laughter of his daughter and the two women who loved her unconditionally, James knew that no matter what came, they would face the future together as the family they were always meant to be. Under the loving guidance of her three parents, Emily had learned to use her gift to help others, sometimes offering comfort to those in need, other times assisting the police in solving difficult cases. On a sunny afternoon, the family gathered in the garden to celebrate Emily's birthday. James, now with a few more grey hairs but with a smile that rarely left his face, watched proudly as his daughter blew out the candles on the cake. Isabel, seated next to Evelyn, smiled at the scene before her. Would have thought we'd end up like this, she murmured. Evelyn nodded, gently squeezing Isabel's hand. Life has mysterious ways of bringing people together. After everyone sang and Emily opened her gifts, the young girl stood up, commanding the attention of the room. I want to say something, she began, her voice clear and confident. 5 years ago, our lives changed forever. At first, I thought I'd have to choose, that I couldn't have all the love that was being offered to me. But I was wrong. Emily looked at each of her parents, her eyes shining with emotion. Dad, you taught me that it's never too late to change, to become better. Mum Isabel, you showed me that love can overcome any obstacle. And Mum Evelyn, you taught me that family isn't about blood, but about the heart. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden as Emily continued. I know my gift is special, and sometimes it can feel like a burden, but you've all taught me to use it with wisdom and compassion. You've shown me that true power doesn't come from seeing the future, but from creating a present filled with love. James stepped forward, pulling his daughter into a tight embrace. "You've taught us more than you realize, my girl," he said, his voice breaking. "You reminded us of the value of truth, the power of forgiveness, and the importance of family." Isabel and Evelyn joined in, forming a circle of love around Emily. In that moment, more than ever, they knew they had made the right decision to unite their lives rather than divide them. As the sun set on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the garden, Emily closed her eyes, letting images flow through her mind. She saw a bright future, not just for her and her family, but for all the people she would help with her gift. She saw hope and love and the promise of a better world. Opening her eyes, Emily smiled at her family. "The future is beautiful," she said simply. James, remembering the day in the restaurant when a little girl selling gum had told him she would save his life, couldn't help but laugh softly. "Yes, my love," he responded, "and it's beautiful because of you." That night, as the party continued and laughter filled the air, each member of this unusual but loving family reflected on the path that had brought them here. They had faced lies, separation, and danger, but in the end, truth and love had triumphed. Emily, surrounded by the love of her three parents, knew her story was just beginning. With her gift and the unconditional support of her family, she was ready to face any challenge the future might bring. And so, in a mansion that had once been filled with loneliness and regret, now overflowed with love, hope, and the promise of a bright future. Emily's story, and that of her family, was a testament to the power of love, truth, and second chances. A story that proved miracles sometimes come in the most unexpected packages, and that the true treasure lies not in material wealth, but in the unbreakable bonds of family love. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Emily made a silent wish that all families, no matter how they were formed, could find the same happiness and love that she had found. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter and embraces, she knew her wish was already coming true. 5 years had passed since that fateful day in the plaza. Life at the Kelly mansion had transformed in ways none of its inhabitants could have imagined. Emily, now 13, had grown into a bright and compassionate young girl. Her special gifts, far from diminishing, had only grown stronger with time. Their story truly shows us that love, truth, and second chances are the most powerful forces in life. It reminds us that family isn't always about blood, but about the bonds we choose to nurture and the hearts we choose to open. As we wrap up today's story, I want you all to think about the people in your life, the connections you've made, the challenges you've overcome together, and the love that's held you through the hardest times. Just like Emily's gift, we all have something special to offer the world, and with the support of those we love, we can face any challenge the future brings. If this story moved you as much as it moved me, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. And remember, no matter where you come from or how your family was formed, love is what makes it all worth it. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay kind, and keep believing in the power of second chances. Thanks for watching.